Okay. And hello, everyone. Welcome to APIPIT's first editor panel. I am Amory Wong, co-founder of APIPIt and an autistic Chinese romance and fantasy writer. Viewers at home will be allotting 15 minutes before the end of the hour-long panel for our guests to answer your questions, so be sure to send them in. Joining us today are 4 inspiring editors making waves in the publishing industry. APIPIt is pleased to introduce Diana M. Pho, pronouns she, her. Diana is a queer Vietnamese-American independent scholar, playwright, and Hugo Award-nominated fiction editor. She has over a decade of experience in traditional Big Five publishing, including Tor Books, Tor.com Publishing, and the Science Fiction Book Club. Diana currently works as story producer at Realm, developing unique and cutting-edge science fiction and fantasy stories. You can find Diana on Twitter at Writer Syndrome. Next, we have Shelly Romero, pronouns she, her. Shelly is an assistant editor at Scholastic Press, where she is looking to build a list comprised of predominantly Black, Indigenous, people of color, and traditionally marginalized authors. Shelly was selected as Publishers Weekly Star Watch 2020 honoree, which, quote unquote, shines a light on innovative, talented professionals from all parts of the industry. You can find Shelly on Twitter at _SM Romero. Amanda Ramirez, pronouns she, her. Amanda is an associate editor at Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers, where she is currently looking for young adult fiction, middle grade fiction, and graphic novel fiction across age ranges. Her goal is to provide a platform to narratives that showcase marginalized communities. You can find Amanda on Twitter at AmandaIsA_Ram. And last we have Alyza Liu, pronouns she, her, and ta. Alyza is an assistant editor at Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing Division, acquiring for SNS Books for Young Readers, Margaret K. McElderry Books, Athenaeum Books for Young Readers, and Salam Reads. Alyza is primarily acquiring books about marginalized characters or characters from the Global South. You can find Alyza on Twitter at Alyza Liu. Alyza will be moderating the panel, so I'll be handing her the mic and signing off here.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. I know it's been a bit of a rough week, so we really appreciate it. I am so excited to be moderating this panel with these awesome editors. I kind of want to start off with a bit of an icebreaker question. I'd love to know what is one thing that you've been watching or reading lately that you've been pushing on everybody around you.
Oh gosh. Shelly, you go first.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I mean, Shadow and Bone. I'm blushing because I'm just like embarrassed that I'm such like a fangirl still inside. But I think that's what's good about being an editor. You're still a fangirl. So yeah, Shadow and Bone, which literally dropped at like 3 a.m. Eastern time. And I already watched the first three episodes, and it's pretty brilliant.
Oh, yeah. I finally got to reading Mexican Gothic, which I adore. It just spoke to like my high school heart and my dreams of running over the moors in various permutations. So it's really, really fantastic. And in terms of television that I am currently watching and encourage other people to watch, I will recommend Infinity Train, which again is one of those like middle grade children's shows that you realize, wait, this is not really middle grade after all, is it? The more you watch it. The last season just dropped on HBO Max, and I absorbed it all immediately. And I'm sad because there'll be no more new seasons, but now I'm just gonna rewatch it. It'll be fine.
And I'm very much a like basic Marvel fan. So the last episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier dropped today, and it's pretty much the only thing my friends and I will be talking about for the next week until we can find something else to hyperfixate on. I won't say I'm going to beg everybody to watch it. But that's where I am currently living.
No, that sounds awesome. I will be joining Shelly on the Shadow and Bone train at some point this weekend, I'm sure. I want to move on to a bit of an industry question. I know that this is something that I think about a lot, I talk about a lot with my colleagues, my coworkers. I would love to know how you as editors sort of balance the need for books to divest from the white gaze with the need to appeal to a consumer market that is already structured around these white norms. And if you have any tips for, authors and how they can navigate this question of representing their communities with honesty and integrity while still appealing to a wide commercial readership, because at the end of the day, this is a business. We do sell books. So yeah, I'd love to hear if anybody has any thoughts about that.
I think the answer to this question is obviously just going to vary widely, not only from editor to editor, but even beyond the personal opinions of editor to editor, but like also what each editor likes to read is really going to play into it. I'm a firm believer that all stories need to be told, and that includes some of the more like really hard-hitting issue-driven books that a lot of marginalized people write about, their own trials and their own traumas. That's not something I'm personally interested in reading. That doesn't make it any less important. But when it comes to, trying to divest from the white gaze and also still being very true to your culture, I think it's so important to just write from a place of honesty and also from a place of like wanting to give positive representation to your marginalization in a like fun and fresh way. I'm always a big fan of any book that promotes positivity and joy across marginalizations. I think that we don't have enough of those. And that's kind of where I land as an editor specifically on that idea. But yeah, that's sort of me.
So I definitely agree with you, Amanda, that this question could be very subjective, not just with editor taste, but also knowing what house that you work at and what kind of things your colleagues are buying, what kind of priorities your what your fellow editors and publisher places upon the list as a whole, and knowing your role in the house. So I think that really matters as well. One of the things I think about when it comes to authors writing authentically to themselves and their communities is thinking in terms of not just like the white gaze, but the outsider gaze. Like, because there are certain stories that are specifically told for your community, and they will understand the nuances and the issues on a deeper level. But anyone outside the community, whether it's because of race, because of gender, ability, religion, ethnicity, what have you, might not have that level of understanding, at all. And what I always consider when working with my authors, especially because I do work with authors that are also marginalized, but in different ways than I am. So how do I bridge that as an editor? Is to like ask them like, you should tell your story how you want to tell it in relation to your community. So if you're coming from a place where I know this is such like a Black issue, I want this to prioritize my Black readers. I don't care about anyone else. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Then I know what my place is as an editor. I know what kind of questions to ask them when fine tuning the story. And I know what kind of, positioning I can give to marketing, to publicity, in different ways for, us to reach that community or to share in that author's vision and positioning of the book. And I also work with authors, who are writing, like essentially, I want to write a queer love story that's also an adventure, but I'm also writing about cultures, that are not Western or US. Like, okay, if that's what you want to prioritize, you want to balance the intersection of like queerness with the non-Western cultures, let's do that. And so each, project and each author can have a very subjective view, and that can even vary from book to book from one author, and that's okay. So when thinking about how, whether that book is commercial or not, I think a greater question to also consider is, is this true to the author's vision? How can we fulfill that? And ultimately, and this is actually a very early question you should ask yourself as an editor when looking at a project before even making an offer, is that author's vision something you can personally fulfill in your role at the house? And if you know you can't, to that author's satisfaction, it's something that you would have to have a very honest discussion about like how you see the project, you know, even as early as like pre-acquisition when we're considering submissions with the author and the agent. So
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything. I think, you know, as editors, sometimes depending on where we're at in the seniority or, you know, whatnot of the publishing house, we sometimes forget that we do have a voice, and in-house, we are those advocates for our authors, and we have to take that great amount of care to champion them properly, to advocate for them properly, especially when they are not of our same backgrounds and the same experiences. And if we're wanting to acquire BIPOC on our list, we have to be careful. I always consider editing any author's books to be a privilege because they're entrusting you with so much of their work that they've, you know, blood, sweat, tears that they've worked and toiled on for so long. For me, it's always a conversation. And it's always in the back of my head, the reminder of my name's not on the front cover. It's their book, you know, it's their intention. Like Diana was saying, like having the conversations of like, what is your intended vision? Like, I want to help you get there. Like, that's what our work is to help them get to that place where hopefully, you know, it comes out and readers absolutely love it. And in terms of like balancing, like, you know, taste and then, you know, also trying to steer away from the white gaze and like, you know, not just focusing on publishing for those audiences. I personally am someone who likes very commercial books. I love a lot of the genres. So for me, it's acquiring genre stories, specifically in like horror, science fiction, you know, grounded fantasy, mysteries that are written by BIPOC that have these different perspectives to it and that bring freshness to this genre. That like we haven't experienced because there's been so much gatekeeping. I think a lot of it is always just the reminder that, yeah, not every book is going to be for everyone, nor should it be. And hopefully you are writing that book for, you know, that intended community or audience that you have in mind, and you conversing with your editor to make that happen.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for your perspectives. I love what you guys are saying about like audiences, and then Diana, what you were mentioning specifically about sort of reaching marketing or working with marketing and publicity to position the book in a way that will reach the audience that it's targeting. I guess sort of in that vein, how can we as gatekeepers sort of avoid tokenizing projects when we are pitching them or when we are positioning them for sale? Because I know that's also been sort of a conversation that's been happening a little bit online about, you know, the best, most responsible way to position these books so that they actually reach the audiences that they're targeted towards, rather than sort of slotting them into like, oh, this is like our Asian fantasy for the year, or like, oh, this is our like Latinx mystery for the year.
When it comes to that, I think I've actually had this conversation many times, and for the most part, I feel that it varies first from author to author, because there are some authors who, like Shelly and Diana have mentioned, who are like, I want to cater to my community, and that's all that matters to me. And so when it comes to authors who would like to cater to their community first and foremost, it's important to take that vision and then communicate it to your team effectively. So there is a way, and it's a practice. Like you just have to practice doing it over and over and over, and then eventually you just get really good at it. But you just have to practice being able to say like, hey, this is a book for the Black community. We would like to reach other communities, but first and foremost, we want to prioritize the underrepresented and underserved Black communities. And then you have other authors. A few of my other marginalized authors are like, hey, I don't want you to just shove this queer romance into the queer romance section and then like never talk about it again. And in that instance, it's really important to take the parts of a story that are universal. Like, romantic comedies are inherently universal. They're not something that only appeals to one marginalization, one community, one gender, one sexuality. There's something there's something about this particular genre or this particular book that is very easy to be able to hand to somebody and be like, you're going to love this because it has really universal themes, regardless of whether it features a heterosexual or a genderqueer or a gay or a lesbian couple. And when it comes to, you know, communicating these things to your team, not only is it something that editors have to continue to practice, it's also something that authors also should be able to practice and like learn how to communicate to their editor, to their agent, to whoever's trying to bring their vision to life, because it's ultimately, like we've said, important for us to bring the author's authentic vision to fruition, whether that is purposely putting it on a specific pedestal, or if it's like, no, I would like to reach the much larger masses.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think oftentimes, like, our responsibility as an editor, like, we are the ones that are writing the initial things in our acquisitions memo, in our copy, that marketing and publicity start pulling from, right? Like, we do our tip sheets, fact sheets, whatnot. So when we have those conversations and we're trying to look at what the audience is after having these conversations with the author, working on them with these revisions, and hopefully, you know, them putting it to production, just being very specific too. I think oftentimes I see companies fall into the trap of just being like broad, like, oh, this is a like African fantasy. And it's like, okay, but like specifically, right? Like, you might be missing out on readership if you're not specific. Like, is it Ethiopian? Is it inspired by Nigeria? Like, you know, what is it? Also with like umbrella terms, like, you know, when we have things being like announced and saying, oh, it's like a Latinx main character. And it's like, from where? What background? It's the reminder, like, you have to have those reminders that your authors are not monoliths, their experiences and backgrounds are not monoliths, and specificity is very, very important, especially when you're wanting to have those books come out and for those readers, or in general for any reader.
What I like about, you know, both your comments is that how Amanda first introduces, you know, universality, which is something that comes up from marketing all the time, you know, and then Shelly narrows down how like the concept of universality and specificity is not, they're not in conflict with each other. They're complementary to each other in different ways that we can get the access point needed for your audience to reach it. And so how I like to think about, you know, preventing like marketing from feeling like they have to tokenize something based on, you know, any sort of like marginalization is first I make sure to, you know, give comp titles that don't focus on the same marginalization, but they're still comps because of genre or writing tone or author status, something like that. So you can like plant, you know, already in their minds, like, you know, saying like, oh, like this book, you know, is like this, you know, movie, you know, that you know, like, in a way that like works because like, you can see like how they're both action adventure flicks involving pirates or something like that, you know, like making sure that you get these clear connections outside to like marketing and publicity's minds will help them gather like the associations they need to branch off. You know, another thing that that I like to do is just have like discussions with with marketing and say like, all right, so this is what is exciting to me about the story, you know? And it could be like a certain character that's very particular. It could be the type of like backgrounds that the story takes place in. It could be like a universal theme, but by universal, you know, I would position it as like it's essentially a story about family in a sort of way, or knowing a marketer or knowing a particular sales rep very well. It'd be like, hey, like, you know, how, you know, this happened with, you know, your father while you're taking care of him. Well, this is also the main character who's struggling to take care of their aging father in the same way and is driven to make these dramatic choices. Like that specificity will really help, you know, in ways that you don't expect. One of the greatest things you can give a salesperson, and this is me like coming from sales before I went to editorial, is giving a salesperson a reason to read your book. Especially for Big Five publishing, you know, they sell in hundreds of titles every season to booksellers. And so the big tipping point in any sales call is when a salesperson goes like in the middle of their presentation. And remember, a salesperson could have as long as 30 seconds to talk about any single book in their phone call, but they stop in the middle of that 30 seconds and say, and guess what? I read it and I loved it. And this was why. That is a keynote to any bookseller being, oh, so you definitely love this book. You're not just trying to sell this to me because you know it fits my bookstore. You really have faith in what this book is about. And any way you can help plant those tiny seeds, you know, to make sales get that personal pitchable moment is the best way to sell in your book.
I love that, because I think one of the really important things, like back in the office, back in the day, you know, the walkarounds, like when you have that book and you want to champion it and you want to make sure that you are targeting the people who you know are going to love it. Like if you know that one sales rep who's like super into like epic science fiction space operas, and you're like, I got the one for you. Like, let me email it to you. And you get those connections with people and you start building that, and like, you know, having all the comps, not just like, oh, it's like the same, like, you know, race, ethnicity, or background. No, but like also like thematically, is it similar in, you know, these themes? Is it the similar genre? Like, you know, what is it? And narrowing that down, super important.
Yeah, I think one of the major things that I'm hearing all of you say is basically that like specificity is what makes something universal. I think that's kind of an aphorism when it comes to like writing. You want to be specific about your characters' emotions. You want to be specific about their motivations. And that's what people relate to, because something that is too general, that is too broad, it's hard to find something to hook into. Especially also, you know, when it comes to comps. And I know that Amanda and I have had this conversation in our staff meetings and like as we're doing our tip sheets and things like that. But you know, very often you find that, you know, Black contemporary books are often compared to like either The Hate U Give or Jason Reynolds. And like, how do we, I think that's part of what drives this sort of pigeonholing and this slotting into. And obviously we know we need those comps, but we also need comps that like draw to other categories that may have like similar writing or that may have similar themes or similar plot elements. And I feel like that's a really good thing to think about overall, is sort of how we're using comps and how we are effective in our use in comps. And sort of going off of this overall theme about being, you know, people of color in publishing, how do you balance your desire to just be an individual working in like the entertainment industry with these like larger, thornier questions of responsibly and ethically representing a community that has been historically marginalized by, you know, the power structures that are sort of in place?
I think the thing that, and you know this about me, Alyza, I make this very clear, that I see myself as just, I do see myself as just a person in the entertainment industry, just like trying to have a good time. And at the same time, at no point do I ever remove myself from the responsibility. Like I knew going into this that that responsibility was going to be there. And so when it comes to how do I balance them, as a person of color in a predominantly white industry, you kind of go into it knowing that it's gonna be something that you're going to have to balance. And so when it comes to how do I balance it, it's very much just making sure that when I do go for things, or when I do really put my foot down for something, it's going to be something that I love. It's going to be something that I am going to champion. And it's also going to be something that, like Diana mentioned before, that I feel like I can responsibly champion. Because there's this desire, I feel, in all of us to try and be the champion for everybody. And that's the fastest way to burn out. And it's the easiest way to burn out. And it's also just not feasible for any one person to be the champion of everything. So it definitely, it's very important as a singular person in an imprint or in a division or in an entire publishing house to realize that there are other people, hopefully, around you that are also championing other voices. So where I feel like I'm lacking in a specific expertise, or where I feel like, you know, this story is really important, but it's not a story that I personally want. I know that I have other people within my imprint and within my division who will help me do that, and who will pick up where I have left off, or who can really, you know, pick up my slack in the the most basic of terms. So it's a balancing act of realizing what you as one singular person can do, and also having the privilege of being able to trust that some of your colleagues are going to help you do it.
I think that's one of the hardest lessons to learn as an editor, is when you get a submission and you do love it, and then you're like, I'm not the right editor. Like I can cheerlead it, you know, be the cheerleader on the sidelines when it comes out and buy it immediately. So hopefully you help it with the first week sales. But like the letting go of like, this would be better off in someone else's hands is always great. It's hard to learn. It's hard. It's part of the job. I think as editors, once again, it all comes down to our responsibility to always be evolving ourselves and always be learning. And not through our authors, not being like, can you teach me this? But like, Google is free, and there have been plenty of resources out there, plenty of ways to educate yourself if you're not sure about something. You know, researching it, like just making sure that like you are outside of the work, but it's also the work of like unlearning your own biases and working towards that. Also, when it comes to the book, like, you know, if there's trust your gut feeling, if you're editing, you're like, maybe like, maybe we need an expert reader on this. And again, like authenticity, sensitivity, expert readers are not the end all be all, because again, we're all bringing in our own different experiences. We're not monoliths, like, you know, to work. But like, if you need that expert reader that is not of your background to check, like, oh, I'm actually not sure, let's bring in someone, have them read, because this is not my experience, might not be the author's experience, or maybe it is. Maybe we're all of the same background, but at the same time, like, we want to have want to take the steps to be careful and to make sure that we're not unintentionally causing any harm, which is also a thing. But yeah, it's preventing the burnout it's very real. Knowing that you can't buy every book is very real. And knowing that if like sometimes when you're asking the questions to your author of like, what is, like, is this, is it that? Like sometimes some of those questions are not things that need to be clarified in the text.
Yeah, and what I also think about too, is that ultimately my role as an editor, is not like is logistical, like getting this book out there and everything involved in that, and it's also there is like a level of professional ethics that as an editor, I would ask myself about working on a book or working, with an author in honing their message. I think there's a separate level of ethics that authors should talk to themselves about, when it comes to art making. One of the things that I think about a lot, is about how, especially in a very heightened communications environment where like one tweet could feel like the downfall of a career, or something like that, is ultimately like an artist's job is to be an artist. And the reason why an artist creates something is because they have a specific message they want to send, even if they're not consciously aware of what that message is, or if they are wrapped by a desire or an idea to communicate something. That is the meaning of art. The ethics of art, which should be in line with that, is how do you build your social, personal, responsibility towards your art and people's reactions to it. You cannot control the reactions of your reader. You cannot be the mind reader of every single person that will pick up your book, and to think that you are intentionally hurting someone with your art, is devastating, I think, for any writer to think about. And if they're not devastated by it, that makes them a very questionable artist, period. Would I want to work with those artists? No. But in general, the people that I've encountered in my life who are writers do not intentionally want to hurt other people. But knowing that, it makes today's, conversation in the book world, in the art world, entertainment world, so difficult because, people have a very hard time parsing the difference, between art and morality. Like, art is not intrinsically moral. Art can be used to talk about messages that are for social good, that can, ascribe to a writer's morality, but the medium itself is not that. And that also translates to, people making assumptions about the author's politics because they write villains, or assumptions that, an author, like, because they have like a character with detestable personal qualities, that is the same thing as the author. Like, that must be part of the author's, outward personality as well. Like, and it's a disingenuous take on how you create art, and how like a writer can sit in someone else's shoes, even people that they do not personally agree with, or using, inspiration from places that can be very dark. And I think writers have an anxiety right now about being able to fully express themselves because they don't want to feel like people are judging their character. But it's becoming more and more complicated these days for people to think about what are the differences between the things we create and who we are as humans. It's, people are trying to correlate, A to B to C, like, in ways that feel, very unforgiving to the creative process into the writer's mind. And so I think my job as an editor is to be very like open as a reader, be very emotionally raw in my own responses, knowing that like what is, you know, if I have this impression, it is my ethical right as an editor to tell my author, these are my impressions, these are possible red flags, these are some things that writers could interpret as, and then it's the writer's job to take that feedback and apply it to their work. And that makes it a really difficult balance as someone in entertainment, because as someone who also just reads books and watches movies and, you know, and does stuff that they enjoy, also knowing that not all of our things that we enjoy are like morally perfect, you know, not, you know, we all have our problematic faves. And it's okay to like, you know, something, but also know its flaws, as long as you're very clear about why you like it, and also being very honest with yourself, knowing what the flaws are and being able to talk about it. And I think that's another form of conversation that I think, you know, various parts of the book world have to contend with. So
I feel like there's also like a level at play too, when like you're writing, like, as you know, as an author of color, and then you're writing characters of color who are not to what like the, you know, wider readership considers their personalities, and it's like also combating like the expectations of what these characters should be, and like, or like what these people should be, and like how they should act. And that's also like fighting against like any stereotypes or using archetypes to like a different way, right? I've like seen it sometimes with people, you know, people are like, I love messy characters, but not when they're characters of color. Or, you know, the responses to these characters are really wild, even though they're like the white counterparts to these characters. Yeah, I think there's also like the layer of like what the like wide readership who may be more overwhelmingly white at times, like who is reading a book by, you know, a person of color and is like, well, I don't know, I didn't like it because of this. And it's like, did you not like it because of that or something else?
Thank you guys for your feedback. So in our last few minutes before we open up to Q&A, I'd love to get some advice from you guys for, you know, author relationships with their editors and with their agents. I know that there's been a lot of talk online about red flags when it comes to those relationships, but what are some green flags? What are some things that you should be looking out for? And then also sort of when you're on a call with a potential agent or an editor, what are some good questions to be asking?
If you are an author and you are like at the point of that you and your agent are talking with an editor about your project for like potential acquisition, one thing that I always notice, and I think authors always notice too, is that, you know, how clear is the editor about their vision of the piece? Can they say what they enjoyed, what they didn't enjoy? You know, an editor isn't necessarily obligated to like give like a full like editorials letters worth of notes. In fact, internally, we're discouraged doing that because then the author can walk away and take your notes with them. So, you know, but we can say like, these are our general impressions of the read. This is like a general impression of like what I love the most and what I could see my house bringing to this project. That is a reasonable answer as an editor that I can give. You know, so another thing too is just like, and an author would have that conversation with their agent beforehand, is about expectations. It's not like they'll like go on the call and the editor's like, I'm going to give you $1 million. Like that you know, that's not going to happen. You know, but also just like expectations about marketing and publicity. You know, it's very hard. I mean, you can, as an editor, I can reasonably give like some idea of what the publicity and marketing treatment could be, but I can't make those promises because it depends on so many factors that come in after the book is bought and after the developmental edit is made, once we start presenting, you know, internally. you know? And I think, you know, agents who understand that and can prep their authors for those expectations would make it a much more successful call overall.
I mean, for me, like as an editor, I try to be really good about communication, like not ghosting an author. Like, you know, I've just heard some stories, but in general, you know, like you as an author, and then also like an agent, like you want to make sure that like the person that you're going to be working on this book that you've worked on for so long, right? It's not just like ghosting you and not answering emails. Things like, I think the expectation to like managing your expectations and like what publishing is once you get like acquired and are with like a house or a publisher is super important. Because like you don't want to get in over yourself of like, oh, like, oh my God, like this is gonna happen. And it's like, well, you know, chill. Also, publishing is very slow. There's like a lot of working cogs and gears. But yeah, at least having like, you know, if like having conversations with that editor, hopefully not the editorial vision one is like a really good question. I've had it asked a lot of times. I love it. But also just like talking. And I think sometimes when you get on that editor phone call and you just talk to that author, you talk to that editor, right? Sometimes the conversations that aren't about the work are the most important, because you do want to find those individuals that are going to be working with you for so long on a title over and over again, over that you got to love because you're working on it over and over again, that you mesh well with, that hopefully are, you know, the same vibe as you, or like the same things, or totally get what you're doing with this one project. And you're like, I know the references that you're doing. I know what you're pulling from, right? You know, that you can, you know, that you're kind of like fangirling or being a fan about with things. So I definitely ask questions. Yeah, like definitely ask questions. I've gotten questions about like how I edit, which is always like, it's project to project, not just author to author. It's every project will be different. And just those expectations.
Yeah, and some like just building off of what Shelly was saying about actually having conversations and also asking questions. I think we often forget that our gut reactions to people can oftentimes be correct. And so what I would really encourage any author that's on a phone call with a potential agent or a potential editor is do even if you're nervous, because we're all nervous in those phone calls, and I can imagine that authors are even more terrified in these phone calls, you should be able to leave that phone call and be like, did I get a good vibe from this human? Like, do I feel like this person understands my work, is going to take it in an authentic direction? Do we like the same things? Did I think that they talked too much? Did I think that they didn't talk enough? There so many what people might consider to be like really shallow and arbitrary things about another person are going to be integral to your working relationship, especially because you're kind of stuck with each other for a good long time. And another thing that is really important to me to ask in phone calls, because I try to steer away from like, do you have any questions? Because that I know whenever I get asked that question, I'm like, no. I really like to be specific. And the one question I always ask is, were any of my editorial notes something you didn't agree with? Or was there anything that I said with my vision that doesn't correlate to what you were hoping for? And oftentimes I find that opens up discussion where either the author is like, no, you actually said something that, you know, really resonated with me that I didn't think about before. Or other times it's, I didn't think that was the direction that I would go in. I'm not sure if that's the right direction. And then depending on how you're feeling, with that editor or with that agent, I think it's important to be able to have those disagreements as well. Like, you need to be comfortable with disagreeing about your work. It's not all going to be, not every note that an editor gives you is going to be something that you agree with. And it's going to be really important in your trajectory and in your career to be able to say, you know what, no, I don't think that's the best thing for this particular project, and either come up with compromises or be willing to walk away. You also have to be willing to say no, even when it feels like, oh God, I'll never get this opportunity again. It's also really important to be able to train yourself to say no.
Thank you, guys. That was all really helpful. I'm going to read out a few of the questions that we received from the audience. Is it usual for editors to give R&Rs after you've revised according to their directions?
So like they're asking for a second R&R? Is that what the
Yeah.
question is?
Yeah, I think more or less. Asking for a second or a third R&R.
I think it's like, I've never done it, but I can, you know, I can see like it really depends on what kind of direction and what kind of project you're looking at. If it's something that you feel like the first round of R&R is like, okay, so you revised it, you resubmitted it, and suddenly if the editor tells you like something else that's entirely different from the first R&R, that could be like, does this editor have the same vision that you want for the book? You know, if you're not sure why they're asking for a second R&R, is it something that like the editor's perspective or the publisher's perspective, like what point of acquisitions is this submission? Is this like, I just want you to do one more round before I bring to acquisitions, and they should be very clear with your agent too about what the status is for this book, then like the agent can correctly gauge like what kind of pushback is the editor getting internally that they can't say. If it's a matter of like the editor really loves it, but they're trying to convince like other people to love it just as much, and that's where that feedback is coming from, that could be a reason why. But I also think like, unless you fully agree with the notes for the second R&R and you don't see like a weird conflict from the first R&R, it's a lot of like creative energy to dedicate to a project that hasn't had an offer on the table. That's my impression.
Yeah, it definitely is so much energy. And I mean, the hopes would be that like after the first R&R, you can see how an author revises and how they take the feedback. And if there is, like Amanda was saying, like if there is that moment of like collaboration where either they're like, yes, I totally agree. Or if they're like, I'm going to push back on this, because that's like a really, like authors have that power to be like, I'm pushing back. But hopefully through that first R&R, you're able to tell like, okay, great. Like I can get it to this point, hopefully get it through acquisitions. And then like whatever other notes I had, I know that they'll be able to revise after we have the conversation about like further edits, right?
I will say this is a question I can maybe provide some perspective on, because I have asked for, Amanda's laughing because she knows, I have asked for multiple R&Rs before, and it does happen at our company. I don't know to what extent it differs from other companies, but I think for us, when we're talking about R&Rs, it really comes down to the author's ability to revise and whether or not we feel confident in moving forward. I think what Shelly says is absolutely correct. You always have power to push back, and you always have the power to walk away and say no and say, I don't want to dedicate any additional energy to this. But what I will say is that it also takes a lot of creative energy from an editor. And if an editor is sort of asking for those rounds, it means that they are sort of dedicated and they do see something that they want to continue working on, also for no guaranteed deal on their end. And I have purchased books that I did multiple rounds on. I have had to let go of others. it always is a case by case basis. And I would always say to ask yourself, you know, when it's always disappointing to get that note that like, oh, we didn't feel like you did enough. I want you to do more. But it really comes down to your assessment of your working relationship with this editor, your assessment of whether or not they have a good handle on your vision, your assessment of whether or not you are working well with them. You are, you know, their notes were clear and communicative. If you felt like you were on the same page at every stage. I have like 2 projects in the works currently that are still being contracted that actually were after 2 rounds of R&Rs. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily like a red flag, but I think it is something where you have to really take it seriously and ask yourself these questions of whether or not you want to invest this time, whether or not you want to invest your time with this specific person. Because publishing is very much a collaborative industry, right? And it very much depends on your relationships with, you know, your agent, your editor, publicists, marketers, other authors, other people in this industry. And if you don't feel confident in your relationship with this person, if you don't feel confident in the direction that they're moving you towards, you always have the right to say no, or you always have the right to even like push back and say, you know, I did this R&R. Can we do maybe like less? Like if I ask for a full novel R&R, you can always push back and say, well, can we do first 3 chapters? Like those are the things that are within your control. And those are the things that you can always ask for. Amanda, do you have anything? Or do we want to move on?
I mean, you know me, you know, I very rarely do R&Rs, and if like, and that's a very personal thing for me. I know where my limits are, and I know where I want to spend my creative energy. And if I'm personally doing an R&R, it's because I'm like, no, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen, and I just need to convince other people. It's very rare that I will personally ask for an R&R if I don't feel confident in what the book already was. Because if I'm not feeling confident about what I got in the first draft, which is obviously not the first draft stages, but if I don't feel confident in what I was originally given, I don't find R&Rs to be a waste of time because they're actually quite useful in a lot of different situations. If I'm not confident initially, then I'm not going to be confident after a revision. And that can apply to, if I'm not confident after your first revision, who's to say I'll be confident after a second one? So a lot of, in my experience, a lot of R&R situations are almost entirely from outside influences beyond the editor's control.
Awesome. So the next question is, would an author's personality influence your decision to work with them?
Yes.
Absolutely.
I've said this many times already. I am a person with a very specific kind of energy. Some people can match that, and those are the people that I gel the best with. But then there are also other people who are like, I am much more chill, but they can meet me somewhere. I've had situations where I was working with, this is a very extreme situation. I used to work with a lot of very aggressive white male authors who did not take me very seriously because I was a young woman in publishing, and because I was support for their actual editor. And it's such a personality-based industry for the most part. Like, we're here for the art and we're here for the books, and we're here as in particular in Kidlit making books for children. And you have to, personally, I feel like you have to have the kind of personality that gels well with children as well. That is me. I am a very big personality that has very big opinions. And so if I find myself in a very combative relationship, it's not one that I thrive in. And so like combative personalities, for example, aren't going to be something that I can work with.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, as I was saying earlier, like I mentioned, like, meshing well with like an author and figuring out those things that we love that connect us, that aren't just like, we're working on this book, are so incredibly like important. But yeah, like I think, if an author is coming in and feeling like about me, or is, like Amanda was saying, combative, is not going to take my edits no matter what, like, is going to push back on everything, is going to have higher expectations than I could ever deliver, that is not a viable relationship. And as an editor, like, I, what we do in terms of like editing that, people see is just like the tip of the iceberg of all the work that we do. And as like a young woman of color, I'm also trying to protect myself and my energy, and my like mental health. And if we're dealing with personalities who aren't nice and who we don't mesh well, or maybe are nice, but we're just like, it's just opposites, it's going to drag on your mental health. And that's what also leads to like burning out and feeling like, okay, like I gotta go to work, instead of just like normal like Monday blues. It's like a full-blown like, all right, I have to deal with this.
Yeah, it's I think we can all say that we want people that we would love to work with. And to be an acquiring editor is to be one of those rare positions in any job period where you get to choose exactly who you'd like to work with. So, what, and it's also interesting because it's like, I have also, had been very lucky to work with a list of authors that were great to get along with, that understood the role of like editorial, knew when stuff was like a artistic decision, a company decision, versus taking everything super personal. And that is something I think authors should be aware of, period. But I do know that like it feels like a very generational, old school publishing vibe when you read stories about these like, very chaotic, self-centered, authors who are usually white men, straight white men, doing stuff, in the book world. And like, how did you get away with that? Like, why are people still working with you? And then you realize, oh, maybe it's because you are the entitled white man who is able to get the job or get that book in because of like certain ways about the industry that I think we're working on overcoming.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to clarify that there is no one specific personality that everyone is looking for. Like, when I say publishing is subjective, I truly mean that down to my bones, and that it goes well beyond each individual book and really does feed into each individual relationship. And so if you're worried that, oh, like you're not gonna like my personality because like I'm too quiet or I'm too this or I'm too that, if you go into each relationship trying to create a comfortable and happy work environment for the people you are collaborating with, you're going to find the people that mesh well with you, and you're going to find the people that make you feel comfortable in a situation. So I just thought it was important that I clarify that we're not all just looking for the same like loud and bubbly and happy human being.
And I think, the nature of being like human is that we're not like, it's not gonna be all rainbows and sprinkles and like confetti all the time, right? Like there will be moments where you're like, oh God, okay. And you got to deal with like, situations that might not be great. But I think from the author side, the advice I would give is just be nice. Like, don't be like rude or mean or condescending. And I think Diane is absolutely correct. It is very much a generational thing. It is very much the old school publishing manner of letting diva white male authors get away with things because they're like important and they like can do that. And it's like, no, just be a decent human being. Even if you don't exactly mesh, just be nice. It costs $0 and 0 cents to be nice. Also, we will talk. We will talk about you being rude to each other, not just in the house, across the imprints.
All right, thank you guys. I think that's time. I don't know if I don't know if anybody from the APIPIt team wants to say anything. But I just want to thank you all for showing up and for being here and for listening to us like chatter for an hour. I think it's been really nice. And I'm so glad to get everybody's perspectives because I do think this is an industry that is very, built on our relationships with each other because we all love doing this thing and making books for people to read. And so much of that has to do with a very deep connection. And we're always looking for that. And so, yeah, I'm just really happy that you guys were able to join us. I'm happy that Shelly and Diana and Amanda were able to join us and provide their perspectives. And I just wanted to thank everybody.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I also love learning from each other. So thank y'all.
Yeah, it's I'm always excited about having these inside baseball conversations with other editors at other houses. Yeah, because I also feel like I walk away with new knowledge, and that's really cool.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your invaluable advice and behind the scenes looks that we never would have thought to ask, like the questions. So thank you.